welcome to our second podcast episode, which will be on fashion, technology and sustainability. My name is Nathalie Verboven and I am a PhD student here at the University of Antwerp, and I will be your host for today. Joining us on the podcast today, first and foremost, is Professor Ian King from the University of York previously. But Ian, please tell us more about yourself.
Okay, so I started out in the music business, but I was in the University of Essex, and before that University of Liverpool, and then at the University of Arts in London, and now in Marangoni, the Institute for whatever they are, and across the globe. I can't remember how many institutions, how many places there are, but 7 or 8 different places, yes. 7 or 8 different places across the world. So I go there, and I'm looking at their research platform and developing their research platform.
Good.
So that's nice, and so it's nice to be here in sunny Antwerp. Yes.
And you have a strong link with sustainability because you're the founder of
Yes, I am.
Fashion
Yes.
Network.
It's always been there, and to be honest, it's been nice to do that, but I can't claim much credit there. I just seem to be at the right place at the right time.
All right,
Hello,
and
Simon.
then going to the next guest today, which is Simon Thorogood. Simon, please let our guests know who
Good
you
afternoon,
are.
hey everyone. My name is Simon Thorogood. I'm currently the Director of Fashion at the Cambridge School of Visual and Performing Arts, part of the broader remit of the University of Cambridge. Well, as you said earlier, I'm early adopter of digital technology and fashion. I graduated from St Martin's School of Art quite a while ago now, but I work really as a purveyor, if you like, of new ways of thinking about fashion and new opportunities and new strategies for bypassing traditional or conventional notions of fashion consumption and perception, I suppose, too. And I explore the ways and means in which technology can offer different perspectives, different kind of avenues into a subject and different avenues out of the subject. But by no means is my speciality or remit concerned principally with technology. I think technology is a tool and a conceit and a construct that we use variously to articulate what we all individually do within a subject.
Specific means towards an important
Yes,
task.
I think so.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, we have a guest who people who have listened to our podcast before will know already. So we have Professor Annick Schramme. Please, can you present yourself as well?
Thank you, Nathalie. Indeed, I'm Annick Schramme from the Faculty of Business and Economics of the University of Antwerp. And actually, I'm responsible for the Master in Cultural Management since 2009. And the Master exists this year or the coming year for 25 years. But appointed as the academic director of the program, after a few years I thought, yes, we should do something special for fashion because it is an industry and it's different than museums or theaters. And being from Antwerp, who is known for fashion design, but there is still not a fashion management program, I thought we should start at a summer school. And that was in 2012. And around that time, I also met Ian King from the University of the Arts London, and you were organizing a PhD seminar on fashion. And so I went to London and I met him for the first time. And you started also in that period with the Responsible Fashion series.
We talked about the Responsible Fashion series already a little bit, and actually the topic I wanted to put for today and I wanted to dive in together with you is how fashion can truly save the world. And of course, when I say this, I am referring to the conference that we had in Antwerp. We already said the Responsible Fashion series, of which Ian is the founder. And in a couple of years ago, we had the conference, now 3 years ago, I think, here in Antwerp. And after which we very recently also released 2 books together with Routledge, and it's a new series, so that after each of the responsible fashion events, there will also be a book coming out linked to that event. And we were very lucky in Antwerp to be the ones to be able to kick off this book series. And I also want the book series to actually lead us a little bit in the conversation today. Some of the topics that also were present in the books, because I think some of the things Ian already touched upon are very relevant today in terms of the new legislation coming out within the European Union as well. But first, Annick and Ian, I'm actually looking at you first. How do you look back at this responsible fashion series, which we held now 3 years ago, and the now newly released books? So Simon, I will get to you later, but firstly, I want to listen to...
I think I was at that conference.
You were. Yes. It was the first time we met, actually.
Okay.
Yes. So I look back on it fondly as well.
Good.
So, Annick and Ian, when you look back at the conference and now at the newly released books, so how do you look back at them?
Yeah, I think they, although it's 2.5 years ago, it's the knowledge that is shared is still very, very relevant. So actually I'm proud because we had more than 200 abstracts, and the papers who were coming out were really, very advanced and from different disciplines. So it was really a rich collections of papers. And it has been through a double blind review. So it is really a kind of state of the art on fashion, sustainability and technology. And actually also fashion and politics and fashion and education. So also in relation to sustainability and to technology. So I'm proud of it. Let's put it like that. Very proud. And I hope that our students will use it anyway, but that it also will...
can empower the industry as well.
Exactly.
And be inspirational. A lot of nice case studies actually are discussed also in the book. Like you mentioned, it's not only interdisciplinary, but also people from a professional background, but also academics coming together in those conferences and also the books. So Ian, what are your thoughts on the series?
The Responsible Fashion Series has been a series of events over a number of years now, and each of them are free.
Yeah.
So the idea is to be inclusive and to welcome people who want to contribute to this discussion. So we've always worked on the situation where people can have a voice, and they can explore it, and they can and share their views. But also, we encouraged rich discussions which take place within these events. I liked the provocative title, and I thought it worked really well because it really goes back to something.
Fashion Save the World.
Yeah. So it went back, I think, to the early 90s, didn't it? I think. If I'm
exactly.
right.
Yeah.
So, and it did ask a question, I think, with an art conference. Can art save the world? Is that correct?
Yeah, it was actually referring to 1993, and that was the year that Antwerp was the cultural capital of Europe. And for the city of Antwerp, it was really a changing moment, because the curator at that time, Erik Antonis, he was very visionary and forward-thinking and innovative. And he also included fashion in his definition of art. And he launched the title, it was more like a tagline, Can the Arts Save the World? Because in the same period, the year before, the extreme right party won the local elections. That was the first time that there was a kind of breakthrough of extreme right. So he wanted to challenge the arts by questioning, can the arts save the world? And so it was a bit referring to that period.
And I think also it being in full COVID times, being very much in a crisis mode, which in the whole world was, but especially also the fashion sector. I think it was also why we at the time chose that title.
A very relevant question. Yeah. And I think because of the bad press that the fashion industry had received, it was a kind of, for me anyway, it was double-edged, because there was this COVID, this notion about, there was people, thinking about their futures because they were largely isolated. And yet in the middle of this isolation, where there was we had this conference, and it was actually a combination as hybrid of both physical and and online, and it worked very well. And people took the risk of coming, if you like, took the risk to come to Antwerp. And I think, generally they were really happy that they did, because it kind of challenged their thinking. And I think the event over the 2 or 3 days really, really worked. But I think also it's important to realize that fashion is not, it's different to art, because I think the problem with art is that you either like it or you don't like it, or you're interested in art or you're not interested in art. But with fashion, everyone wears clothes. And therefore, it's not something that people can deny. They might say there'll be less interest, but there was this, I think, underlying kind of realization and relevance for everyone that they say, yes, can fashion save the world? Because it's not about, are you interested in art or are you interested in fashion? It's actually about really going to the core of who we are and about our identity and about the contributions we're doing for the future.
Exactly, it's part of our daily lives.
Absolutely.
Much more than arts is for some people. So it's really relevant to all in that sense. I see what you mean.
And maybe additional also, of course, there was also a kind of irony in the title, because everybody blames the fashion industry of being one of the most polluting industries. And so we wanted to turn that around.
Yes.
Like that people would say, are you crazy? So there was also a kind of irony in the question.
There was a little 30 seconds, was it 30 seconds? And there was these beautiful kind of comments from all these people from across the world about can fashion save the world? And what was really nice is that we had a variety of views about whether in fact fashion could save the world. And that was really nice. I really thought that was really well done by Antwerp.
But it was a very nice moment, as you were saying, Nathalie, that it was a kind of the break from COVID. And it was a breakout from that particular chapter of history, which, looking back at it, was a very peculiar and particular time. But for academics and for people engaged in fashion studies, it was a tremendous feeling of a release to be back out within a broader kind of discourse of fashion and culture, because you're right, Annick, it is easy to point a finger. It has traditionally been easy to point a finger at fashion to say you are culpable for much of the pollution and much of the damaging effects, really, that exist across a broader spectrum of human civilization and capitalist culture. And unfairly, it is often applied to fashion, although clearly fashion, is responsible for a lot of pollutants and unethical behaviour. So I think for me, I found that a very welcoming occasion to be amongst people again, debating this rhetorical question, and that was both slightly tongue-in-cheek, but also, principally very serious.
Yeah, exactly. And I think staying with you on that, and indeed the question, can fashion save the world? And okay, there's a lot of blaming on the fashion industry, but there's also a lot of innovation there, because it's one of the creative industries, and I think by definition they are very innovative. And I think going a little bit further on that, and also because you're our technology expert within the group today, what role do you see actually for technology in overcoming these challenges associated with all of the things that fashion is now blamed for, the large-scale waste problems, but also how can it improve the recycling? So I think technology might be a factor there in improving a lot of these issues, and maybe the fashion industry can be an innovator in that, and it can also move towards other industries as well.
Yes, that's a very broad question, and I think it's difficult to answer that succinctly and easily. I think, in a sense, that's like saying, can the colour purple save the world? In part, and I don't mean that flippantly. But I think technology is a framework in which to see the present time, and technology allows us to play with a kind of raft of tools and devices and softwares and mindsets that are currently prevalent within a particular point of time, which we all have to accumulate and articulate around a question of sustainability and environmental husbandry that every industry needs to address, not just fashion. I think it's hard to kind of cut off fashion from car manufacturing or engineering or the housing or building trade. Yeah. It is all part of a kind of pattern of construction and consumption. So I think saying can fashion in itself be addressed and cured or by technology, I don't know, but it can be part of a dialogue.
But technology does provide the opportunity to make improvements. For example, with AI, and what we can do is change a lot of the waste that is a really problematic part of the fashion industry, and AI is going to provide means to reduce that waste, and that's been always a factor about the fashion industry, about how much waste and pollution, things like that. So technology will be able to clean up rivers better. It will be able to use the AI to make it. There's so many ways in which technology will benefit from the fashion industry.
You're mentioning AI now, and I'm wondering, and I think some of our listeners are as well. AI indeed, there will be a role for artificial intelligence and machine learning in creating more sustainable fashion. Can you already share some examples, or do you know of some examples where AI has significantly improved sustainable practices in fashion or broader within the textile industry?
Well, some of the pattern cutting, which is now coming in, they are able to reduce the waste significantly. So up until even a year or so ago, there was still quite a lot of waste. But now with the technology, they can remove that. And you will see much less, I suppose you would say, guesswork. That would largely dominate.
A lot of loss in
past.
fabric, that's...
I mean, there are other forms of fibre and textiles which are now being used through technology, which is much stronger, much able to be, much less waste. And we're also seeing technology in recycling some of the fibres and technology that exists across the world. So we've seen things that, like, for example, wood pulp in recycled in such a way that we would never consider a few years ago. And now these things are moving forward at a rapid speed. Because I go back to the point you said about it's always been an innovative industry. Yeah. But I think it's probably the most innovative industry.
And I would add a point about technology as well. I think one of the very important aspects of technology, aside from the hardware or software or whatever it might be, is that technology of a time allows a particular framework around questions that we ask of the world. And so new or emergent technologies allow us to address a different raft or a new framing of questions to a world in terms of how we have duty and care for a world. And I think that's one of the principal functions of a new new technology, that we can ask more profound questions of our world at a particular time. So for me, that is very important, irrespective of the precise technology, at hand.
But of course, I think that technology can contribute to sustainability, but can also be very unsustainable.
Absolutely.
So, and also this data-driven approach. We know the popular companies now like Shein and Temu. That's purely data-driven, but it stimulates even fast fashion. It's more super fast fashion. So technology, in a way, it's not good or bad, but it's how you use it and for what purpose. And so,
like you were saying earlier, Simon, it's a tool.
And I think these big organizations, Shein or Net-a-Porter or whatever online entities, actually, in a sense, they are algorithms. as opposed to just purely, fashion outlets. And as algorithms, in the same way that, banking may be orchestrated or other, as I call it, data ontology, the orchestration of data, becomes a kind of architectural kind of conceit in itself. Mm-hmm. So I believe you're right, Annick. Technology doesn't instantly denote a positive or constructive procedure of interrogating fashion. It can actually be a very damaging because technology is often about making efficiencies.
Yes.
But that efficiency can be doing something faster. Mm-hmm. Or producing more.
And therefore in a less sustainable way.
Exactly so.
Yeah.
So again, I would reiterate the point that for me, technology is a way of asking deeper questions about where we are at a particular point in time. Mm-hmm. And I believe that Martin Heidegger said that technology's principal function was to ask questions of ourselves and our place mm-hmm. in the world and our duty of care.
I'm much more of an optimist.
Yeah.
I actually think that technology has a place, and it has an important place for the fashion industry. And I think in the current climate and in the last few years, we would see that technology used in a much more responsible way than we sort of seen in the past. I think the days of exploitation through technology are now gone. They've been superseded by a much more responsible attitude to say that technology has to be used in ways that help the industry.
So actually coming to another topic, I think, which relates to what we are saying about technology and sustainability is, of course, ethical supply chains, and also an important topic in the books. So several chapters we have on that. And I think, again, here I want to refer to something that was in the news recently. So we talked about Renewcell on the one hand, but here I want to talk about something completely different. So recent investigations have highlighted that there's a lot of human rights abuse within the supply chains, such as those linked to, for example, cotton production in Brazil. So I think, as I know, this podcast is not only for students, but also for researchers, but also for practitioners. So I think interesting, and what I want to talk to you about is how can brands improve this transparency in their supply chains to ensure ethical practices? Because a couple of years ago, I think last year even, we went to the Global Fashion Summit in Copenhagen, Annick, you and I. So I want to start with you. And I think really the buzzword there was supply chain, transparency in supply chain, making things more measurable. So yeah, I want to look at you and see how can brands improve the transparency in their supply chain.
Yeah, but maybe it's also good to rehearse what is the problem with the supply chain in fast fashion. Mm-hmm. Because we see that a lot of companies in Europe have started to outsource the production to the low-wage countries, and in order to produce more and to sell more. So that's the basic of fast fashion. Yeah. And of course, legislation in these low-wage countries is not in place. So there is a lot of, indeed, the low salaries, the child labor, and so on. And also the supply chain, that's how the production is indeed outsourced, and what are the different steps in the whole value chain to produce and sell clothes. And so to make this whole supply chain transparent is not easy for global brands. And often it is not only the production in these low-wage countries, but also the suppliers who are behind that. And so it's really a very complex network of small businesses. And in order to make that transparent, that's not easy. But we have to, because there is indeed too much abuse. And even with labels, there is not enough credibility. There's also a question of control. So we need to change that, and it's a systemic problem That makes it so difficult. But I think with this new legislation, we make a start. One of these measures.
You're referring to digital product passport and the legislation in Europe now.
Yeah, so the digital product passport will be really mandatory, that each product has a QR code where you can indeed look where products are made, how it is made, and in order to make it completely transparent. So, but we are not there yet. But it will come the coming years. So, therefore, the coming years are very, very important. I think, to make the transition.
Control as well, because indeed, we talked about it also with our students today and yesterday. There's all this new legislation coming in, and indeed, it will help make the supply chain more transparent. But I think it was you, Ian, who mentioned. Who is going to check this, and how can we be sure?
I think we're going to see a change in the labeling, which at the present time, labeling is largely relatively simple, and it's very, very small. But I think people now, because once they realise that the EU, for example, is much more serious about maintaining the traceability of an item, and also about who produces that item, and the notion of forced labour, and about all these things will no longer be hidden. And I would actually say it's going to be easier for smaller business to actually do that. However, it's going to be requiring, I think, in my opinion, a different kind of structure. So I think having individual small organisations working apart will be replaced by small organisations working together. So they will cooperate in ways that they can create a kind of pooling of resources, pooling of opportunity, and also pooling of expertise, which they can jointly seek support for. And I think that will make a huge difference. I think the larger companies will find it much more difficult because of their complex chains that go back in so many different countries. They will find it more difficult to justify their sustainability credentials. And I think the sustainability credentials of fashion in the future for the smaller ones will become much easier. And I think we will see a return, hopefully, we will see a return to craftsmanship. We will see a movement away from fast fashion. We will see perhaps more local production. So I think certain countries like Belgium, for example, will go back to actually saying we can make our own. And I think there's going to be lots of positives from this rather than negatives. And I think that small businesses will gain a lot rather than not, in fact, be worried about the dangers of this.
But it's also, as a company, I think, finding your way in this new legislation as well, because there's so much coming towards the companies now. You could argue, indeed, yes, smaller companies, it will be easier for them to make the supply chain transparent, etc. But it's still finding their way in all these new rules, regulations. So I think each type of company will have their own types of difficulties to face relating to this.
Yeah, and therefore I'm very happy with the Horizon project that we just obtained, because that's really based on 6 pilot cases where we will really guide and educate the companies in making this transition. And it's also a requirement that we see that from these pilot cases, we can share the knowledge and that also other companies can profit from these insights and this way of working. So
I hope that some of the case studies that you're going to do are going to be for small companies that can actually really benefit from this knowledge.
It's for SMEs.
And it's going to be something which they can access, and it's going to be freely available.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be, I think, a positive for the industry, because the days of, hopefully the dark days of where the fashion industry was criticised will be replaced by a much more responsible industry and actually moving forward in a creative way that meets the needs of the creative sector, but at the same time in a way that actually is responsible for the future.
Yeah.
And I think I would add, I think we talk of supply chains and the mechanisms of the fashion industry, but I think also what's very important, and this can be a political thing and educated at various different levels, but the consumer, the end user of fashion is implicit in this, has to make political decisions as to which brand or label they align to according to their business and their ethical practice. that has to be the case. And to add on to Ian's point that this may be part of a more collaborative, networked means of working. And I think there will be ways and means in which we can see kind of, if you like, palimpsest, you know, the notion of coming together, working over longer periods of time to create something that is collaborative and co-design and distributed. So authorship of intent or ambitions or strategies isn't just aligned or rooted with the company or the end user, but actually it's distributed. And that everyone's part of a broader spectrum of responsibilities and spectrum of aims and ambitions in which to make the world a better place. And if these can be adhered to and rooted and grown, seed-corned and developed within university degree courses and design courses, that they're instructed at an earliest stage, at schools maybe, in which to regard and engage with fashion.
Exactly. I was going to say, I think the consumer also plays an important role in this, and indeed there's this linkage with what the companies are doing, but it also implies that we have a very well educated consumer, because as you are mentioning, it needs to be in programs, etc. So how can, you are mentioning in terms of education already a very young stage, but how can we improve the education of the consumer in terms of sustainability? Because today, like you were mentioning earlier, Ian, there's so many labels, and what do they even mean anymore? And hopefully we will move towards a more clear labeling. But Annick, I'm also looking at you as well. Yes,
indeed, the labeling is an issue. There are more than 230 labels in Europe. So also there, the European Commission will put them all together, and that there is a kind of agreement. So this balance between the business and between politics and society is really important, and that there is a kind of consensus about what label is really credible. Then regarding education, personally, I really think that because fashion relates to, everyone can relate to fashion, because we are choosing every day what are we going to wear. It's like food. So this critical consumer behavior should be already taught from the primary school on, I think. And we don't do that because therefore young people still think, sustainability, it's expensive. That's for rich people. That's for the older people. They can't blame us that we buy fast fashion. So it's for them it's obvious. So I think if you learn indeed from a young age on how you can be a critical consumer of daily products, I think that would be a big advantage.
But I think it's difficult because it's very often in the mind of the consumer a very black and white thing. Like, oh, I'm buying secondhand, it will be good. Oh, I'm buying something from Shein, it's bad. But still, nevertheless, there's a lot of gray zones in between. So I think, Simon, you also wanted to respond to what Annick was saying. You don't know.
Almost forgot what I was going to say there. Oh gosh, I have.
Critical consumerism from young age.
So I think one of the I just retrieved myself from a senior moment there.
Yes, it happens to us all.
But I think, but one of the interesting questions is what do people want from fashion?
Yes.
And from clothing, and what purpose it serves. Because it is not just a way of dressing ourselves or just buying new clothes or buying secondhand clothes or engaging in a culture of clothes, but actually there's a philosophical metaphysical almost notion of what clothes provide for us, and it's furnishing our minds as well as our body. And so very often when we choose to dress up in a particular way, we're often deciding to align ourselves with a particular character or a particular identity or particular way of
something we want to project about ourselves to the world.
Yeah. So there are different ways and means of dressing up, again, I would stipulate that dressing in clothing is about dressing the mind as well as dressing the body. So I think a lot of things need to be instilled very early on at schools, in exactly the same way that young people, arguably need to be instructed about manners and how to, be mindful and careful about other people in society, people that they don't necessarily come across, in day-to-day life. But in the same way, I think they need to be instructed or mindful as to how to engage with the buying of clothing. What are the ramifications of buying this? Where I'm buying it from? I'm afraid to opt out of that, I think is problematic now. I think we have to understand that we live in a world of polycrisis. There are many different problematic and difficult and very highly regrettable things going on in the world at the moment, which will continue. And I think people have to become more politically charged and politically mindful as to how they navigate their life.
I agree, but are we then not putting a lot of pressure on the consumer, and can we expect that from them? To what extent?
But much of this has to come from government as well, and local government, not just central government. But there has to, again, a palimpsest of people coming together with a common understanding that we are all in this together, that there is a responsibility we all have.
Because of course it relates to the planet on which we all live, so it's a kind of becoming aware of that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, fashion is about communication. And how we make sense of that and what we want to do with it lies with the individual. And I think, if an individual wants to communicate through fashion, then they have this opportunity to present themselves in an individual way. And I think in increasing years, in recent years, we see fashion, rather than being a trend, as allowing people to act in individual ways. So we see, I think, people being much more responsible and I keep using the word responsible, but I truly believe that people are becoming much more aware of the power of fashion, the power of clothing, the way in which they can express themselves, rather than in the past when fashion was seen as impression rather than expression. And that allows us to see things in a different way and allows the individuals to act in a different way. And I would hope that people will use that in the same way as they communicate from a young age. How we learn to speak, how we learn to convey ourselves in a given environment, they will soon be associating that, what they wear and where they buy things, and that choice activity which goes there becomes all inherent there. Because I think, price is a big factor in why people buy things. And some things in fast fashion are good. I'm not going to say everything in fast fashion is bad, because it's not true at all.
Yeah.
But we have to be aware that people, if they're taking the fast fashion route, they have to have that responsibility and say, okay, if we're doing this, then we have to be aware that it's actually causing other problems.
It implies.
So I think going back to the EU and what we've talked about many times now is legislation. Some of that's going to be more and more difficult for this fast fashion industry. And we're going to see some problems for certain large companies, I won't name them, and they will have to reconsider about what their place is in the fashion industry. And in fact, some of them, I suspect, will go, some of them will stay, and we will see a kind of negotiation that takes place.
We talked a little bit already. I want to move to a different topic now about educating the consumer. So education is something that came into our discussion already earlier, but I think also educating designers is something that I want to talk about in relation to what we are saying, craftsmanship, but also sustainability. So how do you think educational institutions can they better prepare future fashion designers and industry professionals to prioritize sustainability? Because I know they are also an important group related to the Responsible Fashion series as well. Ian, it started from those fashion institutions, so I really want to hear your view on this first.
Yeah, and Simon is also
Simon, of course. Maybe otherwise let's start with you, Simon, your view on the fashion schools.
Well, I think I think on the basis of what we've all been talking about, I think I would like to see the ways that design is taught within design colleges, design schools, change and alter and shift. Still, very often in design colleges, we see designers, fashion students, for example, being instructed in such a way that they are enticed by the idea of the pyramid model, with the notion of the designer as the lead. We know fashion is a highly collaborative organism. It relies on photographers and pattern cutters and PR and all sorts. And really, the notion of a designer's name at the pinnacle of a design brand is erroneous. And I think that needs to be stripped away. I think also designers need to be instructed that they are part of a mechanism, again of an organism or a mycelium of sorts, whereby they are not necessarily the most important component, but actually it is a kind of networked scenario that relies on a whole raft of different criteria. And so, in a sense, for me, I think the idea of a fashion student in itself is relatively old-fashioned. I like the idea more of the notion of a fashion augur or a design augur. Augur being the Greek or the Roman term to mean that an elder, somebody who listened to the future. And I think that's how fashion operatives need to work more, to be aware of oncoming scenarios, oncoming concerns and priorities. And I think actually the realm and the remit of the designer has to broaden too. I think designers need to be aware of, to a certain degree anyway, about psychology, how the human mind evolves, what it requires from fashion, what it requires, what kind of nurturing or nourishment that it requires from the state of clothing, how it allows them to exist or to hide or to be out and proud, lots of different ways. And so for me, colleges need to change and shift and understand that the world is broadly changing. I think in many respects, actually, and this might sound a funny thing to say, but actually to go to college to learn fashion actually is a hugely privileged conceit. There is all manner of crap in the world. And I think it is, again, I go back to this point that everyone, not just young people, but everyone, has a responsibility to be politically charged and mindful and active in what they do. And some of the places that this needs to be reprised and re-energized is at design colleges.
Yeah.
I'm going to broaden it slightly, and I agree with Simon totally. I think that the days of purely focusing on the creative as a creative in terms of education, those days have gone. This kind of single figure that has this sole purpose, in those days have gone. It's a very much a collaborative perspective. But it's also that, what worries me about some of this educational process is they focus on the creative process, but they don't actually look at the implications of that. Because, there's, and we talk about sustainability, they don't know what that means. They have no idea what it is to be a sustainable designer. They just know what it is to be creative. That worries me, because I think there's this kind of creative process in isolation
But should they, if we are moving much more towards a team and a collaborative aspect?
But they should all be aware of that.
Yeah.
It's not, if you just make it the responsibility of the designers. No, I think the whole
It starts
the whole
there.
process, it starts there, but it also includes everyone else. The fashion industry has changed a lot in the last few years, and this kind of focus on purely artistic creativity in the fashion shows now at the expense of all the other actors, I think, is largely out of step with what is needed in the industry.
Yeah, in Antwerp and at the academy, they are still focusing on the development of the personal creativity, but they don't force students to be a sustainable designer. So it's more optional.
Right, okay.
I can understand that to a certain level because that's also their uniqueness. And of course, if you focus on the personal development, not only for the creativity, but also to become a strong personality, that can be, then you become responsible anyway, I would think. No? If you...
Yeah, but it's not, the fashion show is not a marketplace. Even though that people think it might, but it's not a marketplace. It's a place, it's a place to play. And that's good.
Yeah, but
you know what worries me is the future of the fashion show, because the fashion show itself.
In Antwerp, you mean?
No, everywhere.
Everywhere.
The fashion show across the world. I mean, it's hundreds of fashion shows across the world, and I think there are real questions about their purpose and their role in the present time.
I want to ask you a question, because during COVID, we saw that the fashion shows, they all became digital.
Yeah.
And one of our most famous designers, Dries van Noten, who now last week showed his last fashion show because he's going to retire, he published an essay. Mm-hmm. It was a manifesto where he was really saying we should do things differently, no shows anymore, or digital, and we really have to get out of this crazy rhythm of fashion shows every season. And now, if you look back, it's all back to normal at this moment. So I was curious how you think.
And that's a very interesting question, Annick, because, you know, if we are honest about it, you know, the theatrics of a fashion show are very exciting often, because we have, clothing on attractive young people walking down a catwalk accompanied by exciting soundtracks and music. And so that creates an interesting and very infectious performance, exactly. So, but I think there are other ways and means of doing that. Certainly, for example, the other week I was at Graduate Fashion Week in London, and of course, some of the problems of that is that not all the students get to show. And so some students aren't part of the event. And I think that's very tough on them. And I think there are other ways in which to communicate fashion. Actually, I don't think it even has to be through technology or the digital, because that's in itself a restrictive framework. But I think certainly in terms of abstracting or diffracting or diffusing or deconstructing the idea of how fashion can be communicated and conveyed, it's still open for grabs. At the end of the day, fashion predominantly, but less so, but predominantly it's about the finished garment. I think that will be contested. I think the idea of the idea garment will start to gain traction at the expense of the object garment. I really, again, I'll use the word rehearsal spaces within art colleges as a way and means of testing out new chemistry scenarios, synergies. And again, to reprise the point we made earlier, where many people are engaged in it, again, the palimpsest of community and local community, where local designers are engaging with local graphic designers or image makers or musicians and creating kind of synergies and scenes of activity. So,
but we're seeing this movement away from this movement towards producing things to replacing it by the producing of experience.
Exactly.
And that really goes to the core of what I think we will see in the near future. So.
I think a lot of food for thought after our conversation today. So I look at my guests for a final statement on the conversation we had today. Anything else you want to add to our listeners?
Yes. Yeah, but not as a final statement, but what also is clear in the book, and that's one of the most exciting things for me about research in fashion, is that this multidisciplinary approach. Because fashion in the academic world is seen as superficial or frivolous in a way. But if you see the potential from a research point of view to have this research and conversation through disciplines, from environmental science, but also from a philosophical part, sociology, product development, economics, of course, then I find that incredible, exciting.
I do agree. I mean, fashion has always been exciting, and I don't think that's going to change. I think now that we're starting to realise the potential of that multidisciplinary of fashion, it's an area that research can go in so many different ways, and we need to encourage it because we know so little about it.
Simon, final words.
Well, I would entirely concur with everyone, and I think for me, I'm intrigued and engaged by the idea of what I might call deep fashion, which is entirely, as we've been all talking about, the deeper that we can go into the subject and to discuss and to frame and to explore the idea of what fashion is, what it is in the mind, what it is on the body, but also the kind of the architecture of it. Examining a particular colour, why a particular colour resonates for us. So we're exploring, what happens in the mind that when we get engaged with a particular green or a red or whatever it might be. And I think things like neuroscience and the sciences behind the arts will unpack some very interesting things in this regard. The particular weave of a weave. Or the particular curvature of a sleeve. I think which will all borrow from the cultures of research that have variously examined different criteria or different components or different subject matters within fashion and clothing and the body, and increasingly unpack that for a general consumer.
Yeah.
So they understand and can be part of a broader conversation about what comprises a garment.
Those are beautiful words to end on. So I want to thank all three of my guests. So thank you very much to Professor Ian King, Professor Simon Thorogood, and of course Professor Annick Schramme. And I want to thank you for listening today. Bye.
Thank you, Nathalie.
Thank you.
Thank you.